I moved to Sydney 50 odd years ago now for an education, and sort of trials and tribulations of growing up as a blackfella, sort of trauma-induced stuff that sort of took me down the wrong path with choices I made, but sort of always had a fragmented type of culture. But it sort of became more specific probably about 10, 12 years ago with sort of people who we knew all our lives, but just sort of different conversations, and sort of one thing it did was get the anger out of me, with my cultural booba, my cultural father. He gave up his time all of the time if I had a problem. So I sort of become that person now, sort of talking to people and sort of assisting them in their journey. And I'm the Senior Culture and Heritage Officer at Metro Land Council. I think my mediation skills in regards to communication sort of assist in conversations that have to happen in and around country and our accessibility down here. Obviously, I'll never forget where I come from. I always go home and keep that physical connection to mine, which is, Colorado, Brian, Moree, Walgett, all the way down through the Pilliga Scrub to Karoona, Wallolo, and out to Angledore, Uwallerai side. So for me, I'm a father of 8 and a grandfather of 6, and sort of we go by a saying in the house where we don't try, we do. That's to do good things, and sort of put in the work is what you get out of it. So my daughters aspire to be things, with sporting stuff, but education is the most important part of that because it's more sustainable for you over a longer period of time. So last time, obviously, we just spoke about my journey a little bit, but I actually reached out to Corey for a part 2, I think because the evolution of individuals sort of creates a better collective. And I live on Dharawal country out of Campbelltown, so I sort of have roots within that. 4 of my daughters have been born there. I sort of talk about the spirit that the Dharawal left in that part of country for all of us to appreciate these days. We use a saying where sort of every single clan group, the 29 of them that are in Wurrung or Sydney, they didn't see colonisation happening, but they seen people in the future. And so we all feel that spirit that is in this country, but there's a lot of trauma in it, and I think all of us that are sort of talking about healing ourselves and others, we are obligated to make sure that that healing is done here within Wurrung. Obviously it's hard to get access to areas where, our people were killed, and a lot of the situations that happen here in Sydney especially, we have warriors within my nation and other nations where you could use Yagan as an example, Jandamara, Pemulwuy here. Let's say Gumma up in Gomeroi, the Red Chief, where they waited till they were buried and they sort of stole their skulls, and they put them in museums all the way over in England, Germany, other places, but I'll do a 3rd repatriation this month, and I think it goes a long way to healing country when you put them back into the soil where they were stolen from. And it's a transformative thing, or to raise your own level of consciousness in regards to your own healing journey as to how you see it and sort of what you see with other people, what it does for them. So I had a conversation with sort of a young girl that works here at Metro today. She's a Culture and Heritage Officer as well, where I asked her, are you looking forward to it? And she said, yes, I am. I'll probably cry that day. And I said, well, crying's a good thing, because they're tears of joy, they're tears of accomplishment, what we've wronged a right of the past or righted a wrong of the past, So for us, one of the first things that I sort of spoke about with the CEO, Nathan, here, was to get onto those repats, that they'd sort of open up conversations with, so that I could sort of take the ball and take the lead with that, so that way we sort of get them back into country here. Obviously, people have to understand something, that before we had the New South Wales Land Rights Act back in 1983, they actually had the National Parks and Wildlife Act. So when you go to national parks and stuff like that, they deny accessibility to all people, but especially Aboriginal people, just because of sort of what's there. Our intellectual property, they hold on to most of that like they own it. So when we get a skull back or the bones and we have to repot it, we have to do it in conjunction with them so that way we can sort of put them back into the dirt, into that ground. So for me, it's a challenge, but it's one of those ones where you sort of thrive in it, where you make sure that all of the skills that you've acquired over the years to mediate and navigate through sort of a system that isn't built for us as blackfellas, we sort of, you make sure that you find the best outcome for everybody around you, and I do stuff outside of here with, with other organisations that sort of you want your mob to learn how to regulate their feelings, and don't get frustrated, don't get angry, because ultimately we don't work for ourselves, we work for other people, and obviously here in Sydney, if you think of the Metro Land Council with our borders, going from the Tuckaroa in the south of Georges or the Rubbit in the north, or Hawkesbury, and out to the Adelaide in the west and the Nepean. Since then, there's been a couple of louks that have sort of popped up, the Gundungara, the Rubbin, but we work in conjunction with them and know our boundaries sort of with where they start and finish. But ultimately, the landscape's very different out that land down here, so we sort of have conversations with them about what should be said. But when you get to more rocky areas and sort of other areas in the north from here, up into Gurrigal country, let's say, Palm Beach, out to West Head, even further, over to the Hawkesbury, sort of where the bridge goes over, when you go north on M1, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of sites in that area alone. So it was a clear pathway of mobs coming into Sydney to do ceremony. So I really feel that because they've been so isolated over the years and sort of accessibility sort of hasn't been given to Aboriginal people, it's a good place to put our mob back. So we negotiate that, and I think for healing the land here, it's imperative that we do that over the next, 10 to 15 years, so that when our kids are adults, they'll sort of be able to walk into areas where you don't get that feeling that you do. Because I know that with sort of men's law and initiation and other things, they were done at higher points, and black fellas aren't like white fellas where they'll say, I see that mountain, I want to climb it. We don't do that. We just sort of see the mountain and sort of visualise the beauty of it, and you don't want to climb things like that. We just sort of go down to the river and sort of find our own time and sort of sit with that noise that is within us, but appreciate the silence that's around us. So for me, I wanted Corey to come back because it's been 12 months down here, and I think sort of the yarn that I had last time, I had a bit of sort of frustration and stuff inside of me where I've let it go now, and I've been going home quite a lot lately so it's beautiful and green out there. There's been a fair amount of rain, and sort of the emu in the sky is prevalent right now where they're laying, and I guess that's about creation, and sort of we call that Burragu, and sort of when you start something new, you have to leave everything else behind. You can't carry that baggage into anything else. So for us, we sort of start things with a new fire, and I appreciate you coming back, brother, and sort of here we're growing. It is an amazing space. A lot of people sort of don't come into Metro and ask questions. They sort of form opinions from the outside, where the vision that sort of Nathan has with the workers here, it's a symbiotic one, where we benefit each other, so that we benefit sort of all of the members at the end of the day, and sort of the land and the things that we do have within our possession can only benefit. So obviously you got young fellows, and sort of it's hard to navigate society, and they need spaces where they're nurtured, where every single one of them can reach their potential in regards to being a young black fella, living in Sydney, because we all come from somewhere else. Most of us here, so sort of we're all visitors here, but that disconnection part has a lot to do with sort of colonisation in how that machine works, and a lot of people don't realise it. They just want to come to Sydney and get a better life for themselves, move away from the bush. There's not a lot of infrastructure, but sort of that disconnection part sort of compounds the problems of colonisation with what they carry into other spaces and sort of what's here already. So for me and other fellows I know that are out there trying to do their very best, it's sort of funding streams and all of those other things, but I sort of think about it in a way where people have got cars, and if you can get a 12-seater bus or two, that's 22 kids. With two drivers, obviously, you need to drive the bus and you get them out into the bush on the edge of what we have at Wallamai. You just sit around the river and the fire and just sort of work on talking to them. I'll freak out on, like a lot of our mob, and I can understand in ways where they always say that we're the oldest continuous living culture on the planet with oral history, with talking. But a lot of us can't communicate properly with each other, let alone with ourselves or our children, because we haven't been taught that ourselves. So when you think about intergenerational and transgenerational stuff, it comes through in every single form of frustration, anger and trauma. And trauma's the underlying thing within that. I had a yarn today there with someone where they were talking about learned behaviours and this and that, and I said, yeah, that's trauma. I said, they don't even know how to talk, man. If they lived in a house where they seen their parents arguing all the time, that's become normalised, and that's how they talk to their kids and their partner and everything else. You've got to go back to the core of as to why they sort of started acting out and sort of breaking the law or sort of, hitting their woman, all of that stuff. My father used to say to me that he went to school, he left school at 10, 11 years old, to go to work. He always used to say he wasn't the smartest, but I remember when I was a perpetrator of domestic violence, 25 years ago, with my oldest daughter's mother. The first thing he said to me was, where did you learn that? Because he didn't learn it off me. I didn't understand it then, what he was saying. And then later on, when I went to ECAB and you sort of sit in that space where people are learning together about sort of trauma and other things and sort of identifying, behaviours, it came up all of the time, and I thought, man, that's what he meant. Because I didn't learn that shit off him. I learned to be a good father. I learned to be a present father. I learned to be compassionate, loving. So I sort of think back to sort of what I was then and how I am now. And I said to someone today there, where I didn't create a safe space for my eldest daughter. Like she always sort of loved me and I loved her. But I was smoking yardie and drinking grog and stuff like that, and she knew it. So I'd normalise that type of stuff in and around her, and, other people would come to the house and sort of we'd do that together, whether they were family or a mate.
Yeah.
And I would never do that now. I sort of made a choice years ago where nobody's allowed in my house if they sort of drink grog or sort of they want to smoke yardy or anything. I tell them to go somewhere else, because this is my daughter's safe space, my wife's. This is what we created together for them. So I think sort of I apologised to her, after the breakup with her mother and stuff like that. Things obviously weren't good, and sort of she was sort of kept away, and I could understand that, because you have your feelings towards your ex and things like that if they bashed you, obviously, so I sort of accepted it. And she reached out probably about 8, 9 years ago now. Sort of it was from a fake profile on Facebook. It was weird for me. And she said, yeah, it's me. And at the time I was working at Kildare Road Medical Centre out at Blacktown.
Yep.
And she only lived obviously out near Mount Druitt at Emerton there. And so I told her to come in, and the kids were only tiny. They still are, obviously, but sort of was a chance for me to sort of not only rebuild that relationship with her, but build one with her kids. And that's what she wanted. She wanted them to feel the same love that I had given her. That was unconditional and everything and that. So got a great relationship with her now. and sort of I've worked at her prioritising the kids more so. So they're at training all the time. They travel in from sort of out in the suburbs now to come and play for RAB. They're not at Mount Druitt anymore. She sort of exited from a relationship that wasn't benefiting her, which is good. So now she thinks about the kids, gets them to footy, sort of make sure that they get up and go to school every single day. And so all of the things that will benefit her in the end because of the laughter and the happiness that she'll see in them. So I think it's sort of become a generational thing for us to do that, as parents that have rules, So I think sort of my brothers, obviously on the weekend we all went home. My sister would have been 60 years old. So we went and fixed her grave and my mother's grave, so in Collie. And we get it ready for when women, they burn the glass out of Collie, and they put it over the top. So we prepped it for that. And we didn't get there on the Friday. Sort of her birthday was on the 10th. Yeah. We didn't do that, but the 11th we got up there, and sort of my aunties and that went over there. My mum's younger sisters went over the day before, a couple of cousins and stuff with my niece, my sister's daughter and her kids. So we went back out on the Saturday and the Sunday, and I could see that she was very emotional within it and she couldn't make a decision about what to do. Yeah. So I sort of had Yana, I said, I said, do you want to know what to do? Because I've done it before out here for Nan. I said, it's not that hard. We just got me and Brad who are here. We'll just work hard and get it done today and we'll prep it for tomorrow because we'll come back, and we cleared all of the dirt out, flattened it out, everything, and then we sort of buried it away. And then he had about 12 bags of concrete ready to go, quick dry stuff, and sort of the next day we got back out there. My cousin Janine, her husband Jason Brown, he came to the fore and saved us in regards to his truck, a wheelbarrow, sort of a couple of shovels, like we had shovels, but the wheelbarrow sort of busted a tyre. Yeah. So I was thinking, how are we going to get it there with buckets? It'd just be too hard. So he sort of came out and sort of did that for us, and it made it so easy, for us. So we sort of got it done, and there was a sense of accomplishment for everybody, where I woke up at 6:30 on the Sunday morning, and sort of we did that, got back to Moree probably about 5:30. I went and said my goodbyes to everybody in the town that, my first cousins, second cousins, whatever, we just call each other cousins, but my aunties, kids and that. And so I said to them, I'm going back to Sydney, I've got a smoking at 7 in the morning, and sort of they were saying, you're mad, and I said, look, responsibilities don't leave down in Sydney where I live. I've got to go and do this because I said yes. But the work out there is done and I'll be back up in a couple of weeks so that we can do that, and it was for the new housing development down here at Waterloo. Oh, yeah. And it was weird for me because the other week I did a thing with KBH down there and sort of the fellas were out there protesting. Yeah. I know all of them because of that over the years with that activism part of what I've done, but I sort of have different conversation in different realms now where I won't protest on the street all of the time. I do for Goomera country, for mine, because it's more personal. I made that decision about 7 years ago, to do that, focus on home. And so I gave them some sandalwood, them fellas, because they need that healing too. Yep. They're sort of obviously fight for something, and like I had a cousin who lived there where their dad got it, their grandfather, and they lived there for 42 years, but they moved out and they get the opportunity to come back later, so the bloke who did the artwork up at Redfern Station, where you got RAB and all of that across there, so he's 84. So he came up here to Redfern Post Office one day and he's in a wheelchair, the lad, and I didn't know who he was, and I spoke to him and then I asked him, where are you from, Unc? He said, no, I'm from out of Bree, but when I was 10 years old, I used to live down there. I used to go to Redfern Public School, and when they knocked down the real old houses, we got moved out to Mount Druitt. Yeah. And I thought, no one was back there fighting for these fellas then. or doing that. You know, they just copped it on the chin and moved, and he's got 2-3 generations out there now.
Yeah.
You know, he's still got his identity as to where he came from, and that artwork that he did up here will live on forever.
Yeah.
You know, so you're sort of faced with roadblocks or detours in your life, but it's how you handle them and how you move on. And I think most blackfellas have a default mechanism within them to sort of go the other way.
Yeah.
You know, to take drugs and alcohol. You know, and 9 times out of 10, that trauma comes to the fore when you're on drugs and alcohol, and you end up in front of police, and you end up before the court, and then pretty much, as we know with incarceration rates, they go to jail. You know, and it's not the best space. As you would know, being there, you're isolated. You're away from your mob. They got no money. They can't come and visit you all of the time, and you don't want them to, because you want them to save that money for outside. If you've got kids, especially. You know, so I sort of wanted to cover a whole range of things for you when you came back, just to sort of see that we all face adversity and struggles in our life. You know, but reaching out and talk to other people who have put those mechanisms in place so that they can keep on going, because we all have struggles. You know, like my father's 80. He's in a nursing home now. He's not doing the best.
Yeah.
But he never gave up.
Yeah.
Ever.
And showed up.
Yeah. I mean, he used to work a 14-hour shift every day, right? So we'd go to work at 2 in the arvo, and then he'd finish at 4 in the morning. So we'd do night shift.
Yeah.
We never seen him, you know, but every Saturday morning, so back in the day, the Newdown comp, before they folded, everyone used to play temporary reserve.
Yeah.
Every junior team would play there.
Yep.
He would come there after doing a 14-hour shift and watch us play football.
Yep.
You know, and then after that, we would go back home. He'd get himself a carton, and he'd have the old records, you know, and he'd play Slim Dusty, Charlie Pride, sort of all those fellas. But he would tell us stories about growing up on Goomera country with having to go to work when he was 10, 11 years old.
Yeah.
Because of the welfare.
Yep.
Pretty much. But his grandfather, my great-grandfather was the son of an immigrant who came from Somerset in England. You know, so he married Edith Hardy from Angledale. Well, Brewarrina, is Hardy's there now. But you sort of look back to their story and stuff like that, and I sort of use it in a context with a parallel line with reconciliation, if you think about it in that fashion, where sort of black and black weren't allowed to get married back then. You had to get permission off the Chief Protector of New South Wales. Black and white, it was against the law.
Yeah.
You know, so they settled in Collie after they got married, and then they found out, obviously. They grabbed her and took her back to Bree, you know, to separate them. And she walked 200 kilometres to be with him.
Wow.
You know, because of love.
Yeah.
So when he died, he was buried in the white cemetery up there, because they got the old blackfellow one and that, where all of our families get buried. But they burnt the glass and did his traditional way because of the love and respect that he had for his wife, and obviously their kids as well. You know, my dad's uncles and aunties. So sort of blackfellas have always been accepting people, you know, with no matter where you come from, if you show love and compassion and stuff like that. And he protected my grandfather too, because he was the first generation after that, you know. So he did his first muster when he was 10 years old from Mount Isa back to Goomera. You know, he was a great horse rider later. They reckon that his sister, Auntie Rose, she was better horse rider, you know. But it was sort of that, it's weird with my father, you know, where a lot of fellas will pass down sort of stories, and it's a way of passing trauma onto your kids without you even knowing.
Yeah.
But he didn't do it in that way, and I didn't see it that way. I just looked at it as an inspiration, where he sort of got us to visualise our country, you know what I mean, with the way that he spoke.
Give you a map.
Yeah. You know, and so obviously him and my uncle Denny, you know, like he was the president of RAB for years, coached him, everything, you know. Well, he was a year younger than Dad. So they went out there working, and they used to have to take the bottom bark off the trees so they'd ring bark it.
Yep.
You know, like a lot of fellas sort of disagree with the ring barking and stuff, but so I wasn't alive back then, you know what I mean, and faced with the welfare coming to steal me and taking me down to Sydney here to Platform 1 and sending me on to the Kinchella or wherever else.
Yeah.
So you sort of, Pop Ned, he took them with him and did that, and they used to get 10 shillings a week off their grandfather. He would pay them out of his own pocket so that they were getting paid for work, and the old fellow used to tell us stories, and it gave him a better understanding of his country, so that back in the day when I couldn't get a job down here because I had a criminal record, I tried very hard. I had sort of HSC, all of that type of stuff sort of there in my resume, but I just couldn't get a start. I used to go up to the bush and I'd do the harvest with the wheat, cotton, stick picking, everything, and he would wait for me to finish with someone and say, you come and work with me, and it was one of them fellows where he'd say 16-hour days were nothing.
Yeah.
Where I'd say the taxi's killing. And he would say, yeah, but the money's good. So we do it. Yeah, that's how he sort of looked at it that way. You drive out to work, it was 35 k's sort of east of Walgett, where I'd sit on the back of the truck because you had 3 old fellas in the front, him and 2 other fellows. And sort of I'd be on the back of the ute going out to work. Sun's not even up, then you go home and the sun's already down, but it gave me a better understanding of my own country because he told me about the rain patterns, everything, what plants were there, sort of that stuff. His younger brother, Uncle Larry, and he did the same thing sort of when I was older, so it was you were being taught about country without being taught about country, because I was just out there working at the time, and I loved it. I got to drive front end loaders, sort of do chickpeas, sort of everything, and sort of at a time after my mother had died, I sort of didn't know how to sort of deal with it at all, and I was arguing with every single person that was going through the same thing as me, and then it was weird one day he said to me, like, I loved her longer than you, and it was, people say light bulb moments, it was like a bloody lighthouse.
Yeah.
It was, fuck, what have you been doing? Arguing with him, and sort of after that, I sort of knew that I had to do something. And that's when I sort of went back to ECAV, sort of started that. I call it a relationship journey.
Yeah, relationship with yourself.
Yeah, and with other people as well, just because.
The growth in that, Yeah.
I think with having better relationships, sort of, it forces you to have better relationships with people that are around you, and especially with myself, because yourself, you self-manifest and how would you self-medicate, not with grog and alcohol, because I'd given up 15 years ago now and stuff, but I'm sort of, you self-counsel yourself and you always give yourself the wrong advice, and you're still doing the same things when you got you into that situation in the first place.
Yeah.
And for me now, I sort of talk to people in a way where I just love you. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter whether you're black, white, or brindle, but with blackfellas it's different because of the way that I engage with my spirit. And so I did some nunkery stuff not long ago there with the lady, and sort of the first time I'd ever met him, the old unkie was there like that. And I could feel him shifting my spirit, and he was saying, "You got a big spirit." And I said, "Yeah, I've been told that in the past." And then I did it with a lady not long ago who's been given permission to do that. And she sort of does it with bloods and other things. And she was saying, when you walked in, I seen you painted up, but you were about 7 foot, not the height you are.
Yeah.
And I said, I sort of had dreams in the past, you know what I mean, of stuff, because she talks to you for a good 30 minutes first, have a good yarn, and then to get to know you, and then she'll start doing her work. And it was amazing. And I sort of took from that I have to sort of do more in regards to going to see them fellas and, just sort of share that stuff, so that I don't take ownership of it, but I certainly use the spirit that I certainly have to affect other people's lives and their outcomes, and assist them.
Oh, and going back to, some of the things that you said there, and it's, a pleasure to have you back here, and anytime you want to, come back on, it's, as I said to you, and I said it to everybody, this, coming on here, it's not about me or the podcast, it's about you. And it's about every individual that comes on here wants to have a yarn and share something, or as big as small as that it is. So, thanks for coming back on, Uncle Bubbly. But, those bigger yarns that you have in there around getting back to country and about your life in general, it's that not using the adjectives of, that circle moment, but as young fellas, we get taught and we learn, and our parents tell us some really insightful stuff at the time, but we don't learn it until we reflect on it years and years later. So, some of those things for you being a father very early on were the things you were doing where your father said to you, you didn't learn that from me.
No.
So it's sometimes it's that in hindsight, it's some beautiful things we go back and look on, but in the moment, as stubborn men, sometimes we think we know our own path without actually taking those things on board.
I think when you talk about sort of the circle and things like that, I hear it a lot, and I think a lot of fellows that are in the circle don't really have a full understanding of that circle, of what it's meant to be, what it's meant to mean, and what their role within that circle is and should be. I think our ego gets in the way a lot of the time. I sort of tell a lot of people that the first part of culture is to be humble, to be open to learning, because we sort of live in a construct that isn't culture 24/7 like it was before. You got to slow it down and sort of be able to do that, and I use a little saying with brothers that I've helped, sort of, whether it be, coming out of prison or just in a struggle here and there. I said, one thing, brother, that our people didn't do everything all at once. That's how they got it right, because they had a process to get there, and so when you talk about the oldest continuous one, I said it was continuous in regards to their role that they had. Not all of us went out and sort of caught that kangaroo. Not all of us made the fire in the morning. Someone did that at each one of them that they seen. When white fellas first came, they said multiple fires. Multiple people did that. There were multiple families where they had that responsibility, but their role was the important part with that responsibility that they had. We have that same role today. Where I remember doing a yarn down at NCIE years ago, and that it was through air cabin that with Healing the Warrior, and there were a couple of young fellas there where they thought that their woman had to cook and stuff like that, And I said, look, brother, my father used to go to work at 4 in the morning, come home at 3 in the afternoon, and he'd prep dinner, and mum would come in and compliment it at the end, and they'd finish, and then everybody would sit around the table and eat. I said, it's our role to do that too. So we alleviate some of that pressure that woman carried the baby for 9 months. I can't imagine what it would do to your body to have a child or to have multiple in a couple of years, because your body doesn't actually get that time to sort of heal properly. I see it with my own wife, with her hips and everything. And so the last week we went up home and she jumped in the water, and when she got out, I could just see the relief. But Collie's not just there. I say that to her all the time. I wish I could get some of that water out of the artesian basin and bring it back here and then recycle it back into a thing so that she could just jump in all of the time. It's the same as a black soil. I always say, I wish I could just get 2-3 tonne, bring it down here so we could just build a garden, different environment, but the soil is the key to that. And I think the roots that you put into the ground have everything to do with that soil that's in and around you. They're the contributing factors of other people that are in and around you to help you flourish, to help other people flourish in and around you, because sort of obviously blackfellas, they talk a good yarn and stuff, but we don't all walk that same good yarn, and it's hard. Like, I'm not out here blackfella bashing, because we've got enough of them fellas on the outside of us with doing that, but we could do a whole lot better with collectively sort of thinking with outcomes. And obviously, with most things are government initiatives, so they're never going to really get the outcomes that we want and need. And they're never going to provide a service for every single person.
No.
Because generational relationships contribute to that too. Because if your mother and father had an argument with someone and then their kids in an organisation, well, then you don't want to go there. It's just that simple, bro.
Yeah.
You know, blackfellas are weird like that, you know, and I can understand in a way, but I can't in a way because, you know, if your child needs something, then take them there just to get it, you know, and
that blind loyalty.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's happened so many times within our mobs and that, and it's sort of more of a hindrance than a help, you know, where we had.
Yeah. So yeah, it's, you know, those going back to, you know, the continuous learning, continuous through oral. I guess the way I frame it is that continuous listening, because some of those yarns we have and the way we talk and the way we carry those yarns is because we haven't actually listened to not only what we've been told, but the things around us. You know, you spoke before, going down, sitting by the river and just listening to what's going on in the river, what's happening there, what's happening for us. So yeah.
You know, when you're taught how to be an active listener, every single black person was pre-colonisation.
Yeah.
See, because when you think about, so when you see craftsmanship of objects that our people made back then, they had to listen to learn so that they did it properly, you know, and those teachers were amazing. Now, like some of the stuff that I've seen in the Australian Museum that's downstairs, I could not believe that they didn't use sandpaper or a Dremel.
Yeah.
I seen a chain there where they had done from one piece of wood every link, and then a thing with like 2 hooks on it to drag something.
Yep.
Like, it was unbelievable for me to get my head around that. I smoked some objects that they were taking back to Wagga to an art show so that they can put them on display. There was an object like this here where it was like a mace.
Yeah.
You know, so people know what a mace is, where you swing it around, and this one was sort of had the thing, but it was like they had thumbtacks, thumbnails in the top around there.
Yeah.
Like, Corey, it was unbelievable. And how thin. So they had a little, like the handles here that it came up, and it was just so thin, like it would chop your knee in half.
Yeah.
And it was Wiradjuri and that, and I couldn't believe how beautifully crafted they were, and just the time that it would have taken with the song that would have been sung, with them sort of teaching generationally so that it was passed on that way, where, you know, when you talk about sort of the active listening and the learning part, I think the way that we're being conditioned these days is to block it.
Yeah.
Because we only get it when we go back out into the bush, I find, you know, where my daughters, when I take them out into the bush, because there's no cell phone coverage. There's none. So they got to just put them down, and then, you know, the one thing that it forces you to do out there too is go to bed earlier.
Yeah.
Because there's no TV. So once you're finished with the fire, you sort of just go and jump into your sleeping bag, your swag, and it when we go out home, and I just sort of have a camp, and then they'll get up and they want to do the fire again because I'll see the embers there just glowing over in the distance. I better go and get some wood and put on there.
Yep.
It becomes second nature to sort of help the collective of people. Kids these days, they don't do that. They'll get up in the morning, you know what I mean? They'll get their lunch.
Yeah.
They'll get their shoes on. They won't ask, oh, do you need any help?
No.
I've got 2 daughters, they go out to Batto every day, and it's every girl for herself to get ready. The only time that they work together is when they both get in the car with me to get a lift.
Yeah.
You know, and I only have one rule in the house where you don't argue with your sister.
Yeah.
You just don't do that. You know, there's a lot of people out in the world that are going to argue, fuss and fight with you.
Yeah.
So you don't need it at home.
Yeah.
You know, that's the only sort of thing where they'll get a bit of a sort of a voice raised with me, because I'm pretty easy sort of with them, you know, because they do most things that me and Christine ask them, you know, and sort of create a life where you don't want them to have a worry in the world, you know, because all of the bills and everything else, they're our worry as parents. They don't need to hear about that stuff, you know. That's why you get up in the morning and go to work and do what you got to do, you know. But sort of, have you done your homework? I got an email from the school today. Have you done that assessment? Have you done this? Have you done that? Just to make sure. Yes, I have. Are you having trouble with it? No, I'm fine. Just sort of those yarns every single day. Whereas I make sure that I ask them, how was your day every day? You know, and the 8 and the 10-year-old are still in primary school, so they'll always butt in with each other when they're trying to tell their yarn. Or then they'll turn to each other and say, it's my turn, and stuff like that, where it's okay, girls, relax, we've got enough time, you know, and then you tell your yarn. Just sort of, I only reference that just because of the way that we all sort of don't make that time to talk to our kids, because we're caught up in our own stuff, obviously, as adults, you know, but people have got to do that, you know, so that they get used to communicating again. You know, because they've got their heads in their phones from the time that they will leave the house and get on the train. If your kid gets on a bus, they've got their head in the phone. Then they might just pop their head up, where am I? Oh, yeah, it's my stop, bang. Then they get off, and then they'll use their phone again to go and tap and go if you give them money or whatever. So they're not really interacting with anyone going to and from school. You know, even with other kids from their school. And 9 times out of 10, when I bring my daughters and they're on the bus, every kid is just going crazy. You know, they're not really sort of sitting down like. Me and my brothers would sit on the bus, you know what I mean? And we'd just have a yarn with each other and we'd make fun of people, you know what I mean? Because we'd see the same people every single day, but they would sort of have different seats. You know, so they'd play musical chairs on the bus every day. We'd always sit up the back, you know what I mean? The watch fellas and that, going from Elwood, or if we caught the train from Bumble Park, we'd sort of do that, just have little things and sort of, but we always interacted with each other that way. Me and Ralph and Pete, we've always got those stories to go back to today, you know, about our childhood growing up and things like that, whereas a lot of kids don't even do that these days. They'll sort of look for the external, you know, where they'll look for friends outside of that. And I was explaining it to fellas not long ago there, where in Moree, let's take that for an example, where all them old women that used to sort of tell their son to get out there and tell their fella to stop messing up, they've all passed away. So that's why kids are out of control. Because I don't know what it is with the groups that are up there, or the fathers, grandfathers, or whatever, you know, but parents have become the enablers with their kids, and they don't rouse up my kid, don't do this, don't do that, but they end up in jail. You know, and it's sort of, we were up there the other week, and I seen a story the other day with that drone thing and that, what they got in Moree, you know, and sort of my uncle was on there, or 2 of them, Tomo French and Daryl French, you know, they're both my uncles, you know, and sort of Uncle Daryl there, he married my Aunt Gail Sampson, and Uncle Tomo, his mother's a Weatherall, their dad's cousin, so I seen them both on there and stuff like that, and I thought I'll just have a bit of a watch. And then the other week, me and Ralph went up there for a funeral, my younger brother, and we pulled into my cousin's place, you know, and he was there whinging out the front and stuff, saying, this, talking about his son. Saying, well, what happened? He's saying, he's fighting with his woman again. I said, well, what's going on? He said, no, the coppers are coming already, you know, before and that. And I said, well, you can't do that, you know. I said, did you go to jail for that before? You should be having yarns with him where he's not doing that stuff, mate. Coppers pulled up out the front. And they said, you're not his name. And I said, yeah, no, I'm not. You know, and I said, why, I just know I was here anyway. And they said, no, the drone seen you. And we came back around. So it was sort of, my brother Ralph was spinning out because he never sort of lived that life. He was sort of always clean cut, you know. He left year 12, got a traineeship, been at Centrelink ever since. That's just, you know, he always sort of heard, because I would go home and tell him stories about, you know, what I was doing back in the day and stuff like that, and just sort of open his eyes up and stuff like that, and I'd always sort of give him money to not tell anyone, you know. The hush money and that, don't tell my ex-missus, you know, because otherwise I'd get stung. Or I'd say, don't say it was this much, I just say it was that much if you could ask, because he could not lie to anyone.
Yeah.
They asked him a direct question, which is good. You know what I mean, in a way, but not good when I would jig school and they'd say, where was Raymond? No, he's digging school. What? Yeah. Or bubbly. So, and sort of Ralphie, he's been a part of my healing journey.
Yeah.
My younger brother, you know, I always tell people he's the most inspirational fellow. You know what I mean? If I could be somebody, it was him. You know, but with the same, always say that with the same athleticism that I got in comparison to him. You know, but he was a great athlete when we were a kid, but he just sort of one of those fellows that just sort of, he lives from there. He always has, always happy. You know, just sort of one of those real good fellows. Never have an argument with people, always happy when he's having a charge and that. Sort of, I wish he'd give it up, but he did come back to playing cricket, then he took it up again. You know, there's been situations in our life where sort of when our mother died and then my sister died not long ago, it just sort of overwhelmed him, you know, so sort of very hard for him, the lad, but he's sort of an inspiration to me outside of myself. You know, my older brother, Sonny, you know, sort of, we don't talk like we used to, but he's one of them fellas, man, he's had about 3-4 strokes, you know, he's still functional, but he's sort of starting to slow down now, the poor fella, but he's still a father, a grandfather, still doing well, and I think we all get that from our father with what he did, you know, and Uncle Denny as well. He's our fella, you know, he's sort of very close to us, you know, and you sort of have those inspirational men in and around you, you know what I mean? We sort of all look for the external of that. A lot of kids these days are looking for sports stars.
Yeah, or social media, or a lot of these people talk about that real toxic masculinity, and that's how you're meant to be living. Yeah, there's a lot of really, really negative shit out there, but within that too, there's a lot of beautiful stuff. You just got to sometimes search a little bit more to find.
Well, I seen yesterday where I was out at the Thurrock Madoc and I seen Latrell Mitchell stand there for 2.5 hours to take photos with blackfellas who just smiled every time they walked up and seen him.
Yeah.
And that type of stuff there, you don't see anywhere else. It's just all negative with that fella.
Yeah.
You know, and to give up your time and just to come there at the request of, you know, Darryl Wright from Thurrock is a testament to him, you know, and he greeted every single person the same way, you know, and sort of hugged them, and sort of like they had local knowledge there. Nellie Dargan, Chanel, she was the MC, you know, so you sort of had an inspirational story right in there, you know, and sort of she had a bit of yarn, and then local knowledge come on and they done a couple of songs. Well, they got a didgeridoo group out there that sort of we're in. Yep. They do a little dance every year, the kids, you know. And then the Dids group went on, and then they had other dancers from out there. So they sort of showcase sort of what the kids are doing, what the community are doing to highlight that, you know, within culture, within what will, you know, feed their spirit. And sort of Uncle Roger Knox, he came along later, you know, and sort of I smoked him because I went up to him and his grandson, you know, Barakai, because every time they come to Sydney and they come to Campbelltown, I make sure that I take gutterweed, sandalwood to them so I can smoke them with that plant from our country. And Unc said, have you got that stuff? And I said, yeah, I've got it over there, Unc. I said, you want to come over the back there and I can do it? You know, it was the first time, and this is about the 5th, 6th time that I've done it.
Yeah.
You know, and yesterday was the first time that he actually spoke language to that plant while I was doing it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you know, and it was sort of, for me, it was just an unbelievable thing to witness, you know, and I watched his grandson and he just started smiling, you know, and I thought, this is why we do it.
Yep.
You know, that healing power of language, that gutter with the smoke, you know, sandalwood, but also the space itself to create because when I did the acknowledgement in the morning, I spoke about safe spaces for blackfellas to just be ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, we're always going to have a lot of non-Aboriginal people come into this space, but they love the infectious attitude that we have. That's why they want to come, you know, so we should embrace them too and acknowledge them, you know, because they see the love and the good spirit that we always have, you know, and I acknowledge Thurrock, you know, even in times of sadness, grief and depression, they're always there for families out that way,
Yeah.
you know. Sort of if there's a family loss or whatever, they sort of do go above and beyond. They're not just a medical service, no, they just sort of help families. So and sort of that's the external part of healing, where you sort of feed off that good
Yeah.
spirit of other people, you know, and it's not living vicariously through them because you're a part of that community.
Yeah.
You know, and it's certainly not like vicarious trauma where we pick things up, you know what I mean?
No,
Because that
exactly.
comes from negative. And this is a positive thing, you know, the other side of that coin.
Yeah.
You know, there are many, many things that we can do to sort of uplift and empower our people, you know, but it starts with us as individuals so that we can create a collective movement to do that, and our men need it, you know. And obviously I remember when you were ringing me probably 12, 15 months ago, you know, about talking about the podcast,
Yeah.
you know, and I never comment, but I like sort of the
Yeah.
posts. I see all of the people that you spoke to and the wide range of men and the different backgrounds and different lived experiences that they do have and life
Yeah.
experience. I think it's a fantastic thing, brother, and I really hope that it picks up and gets bigger and larger so that our men do have a platform. And I will say that Thurrock they've got a space out there at AB Central where there's a studio.
Okay.
So it's a reading space, a learning space for kids, but also a place where they can express themselves.
Yeah.
Get in contact with them, brother, because I think it'd be good to sort of collaborate and go out there and sort of talk to Gary Dunn. He's
Yep.
out there all the time. Just so that way we can sort of build that network of in here
100%.
without there. You know,
100%.
and I want to say thank you, my brother.
Nah, thank you,
You
bro.
know, and
Thanks, yeah. Thanks for coming back on, and thanks for sharing a bit of your yarn. And if you feel some more stuff that you want to yarn about in the future, reach out.
I'll never stop talking, brother. You know that.
Thanks, Bubs.
No, thank you, my brother. Thank you.